They say no parent ever imagines the day their child stops calling. But even worse than silence is being forgotten. That morning, Andrew Miller woke up just like he had for the past 79 years, early, deliberate, with the quiet dignity of a man who had once been needed. But today wasn't just another morning. Today, he turned 80. He stood in front of the mirror, slowly buttoning his crisp white shirt, the same one Helen had always complimented him on. His hands trembled, not from age, but from a storm building inside his chest, a question clawing at the edge of his mind. Would they come? He pressed his palm gently against the window, staring out at the empty suburban street. The silence outside mirrored the silence within. No car, no phone call, no knock on the door, just stillness. Behind him, the clock ticked, each sound louder, heavier, like a countdown. He remembered when this house had once been full of laughter, warm bread in the oven, little feet stomping down the hallway, and her voice. Helen's voice, always humming, always soothing, but Helen had passed 2 years ago. Since then, everything had started to drift: his health, his energy, and worst of all, his family. His son, David, hadn't spoken to him in months. The last time Andrew saw his daughter-in-law, Victoria, she barely looked him in the eye. She had always been cold, but now her distance felt personal. Andrew had sent an invitation 3 days ago, carefully typed, politely worded, with every ounce of his remaining pride, asking them to join him for dinner, not even a reply. The table was already set, a white cloth lay like untouched snow. The cake sat in the middle, undecorated. And beside it, a small plate of sliced apples, just the way Timmy, his grandson, used to like them. Andrew had prepared everything himself. He didn't want to ask anyone for help. He wanted today to matter. Even if it would be the last birthday he'd ever celebrate, and yet, no one came. Now, I've seen a lot of broken men in my time, men torn apart by war, divorce, addiction, betrayal. But there's something uniquely cruel about being abandoned by the very person you once carried in your arms. Your own son, your blood. People talk about growing old like it's graceful. That's a lie. Growing old is a reckoning. It's when the world starts to forget you, when your voice begins to echo back at you, when the people you loved most now avoid your name like it's some heavy reminder of their own failures. Andrew didn't cry, he didn't curse, he just stood there, still, staring out the window, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. And I want you to think about something. What does it take for a father to go from being his son's hero to becoming invisible? Later that evening, as the sky dimmed and the shadows stretched long across the floor, Andrew blew out a single candle. He didn't make a wish, he'd stopped doing that a long time ago. But deep inside, he carried one quiet hope. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of his story. That somewhere in the silence, a door might still open. A voice might still call, a child might still remember. Let me tell you something, friend, we often think the pain of loss comes only when someone dies. But there's another kind of death, the kind where you're still breathing, but no one sees you anymore. That's the pain Andrew felt that day. And sadly, it's the kind of pain many parents are living through in silence. What happens next will test everything Andrew believes about love, forgiveness, and whether family can truly find its way back. After being broken beyond recognition, if this story already tugs at something inside you, if you've ever felt left behind, forgotten, or simply wonder how such things could happen in a happy family, then I invite you to stay with me. Because what's coming is as heartbreaking as it is healing. And before we move forward, I'd love to ask one small favor. If you believe stories like these deserve to be told, please subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep bringing you these deeply human stories, ones that just might reflect your own. Now, before we dive into what happens after that lonely birthday night, let me leave you with a small question. Question for you: if you were in Andrew's shoes that day, which would you do? A, call your son again, hoping he'd finally reply. B, say nothing and pretend it doesn't hurt. Drop your answer or be in the comments. And don't worry, there's no wrong answer, but your choice might just reveal something deeper about how you handle pain. Let's continue the story next. They say that when a man grows old, he wants only two things: to feel useful and to feel loved. But what happens when a man gives everything to his family? only to be made to feel like a burden in his final years. After Helen's death, Andrew Miller did what many aging fathers do: he searched for purpose again. His house, once filled with warmth and her gentle laughter, had gone hollow. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was suffocating. So when David, his only son, suggested that Andrew move in with him and his family, Andrew saw it not as charity, but as a second chance. A new beginning, a way to not just escape loneliness, but to be needed again. "Dad, it'll be better this way," David had said one afternoon, sipping his coffee. "You'll have company, you'll be looked after. And Timmy will love having you around." Andrew smiled, though he sensed the unspoken hesitation in David's voice. Still, he wanted to believe that this was a blessing, not an obligation. He packed up his few belongings, folded Helen's old shawl one last time, and said goodbye to the house he had built a life in. As the front door clicked shut behind him, he whispered, "We'll be together again soon, my love," and then he left carrying decades of memories and a heart full of hope. In the beginning, everything felt right. Andrew threw himself into the role of a grandfather with quiet pride. He cooked breakfast every morning, made sure the kitchen sparkled by noon, and spent his afternoons walking the neighborhood park with little Timmy bundled in his stroller. The boy's laughter, so innocent, so alive, was like medicine. For a while, Andrew truly believed he was part of something again. But love, when it's one-sided, begins to wear thin. Victoria, David's wife, never said much at first. Her smiles were polite, her comments light, but slowly, the tone changed. It began with small remarks, offhand but sharp. "Andrew, maybe go lighter on the butter next time," or "Timmy needs structure, not just playtime." Nothing directly cruel, just enough to make him second-guess his place in the house. He adjusted. He made lighter meals, cleaned more quietly, spoke less at dinner. Still, her disapproval crept in like water through a crack in the foundation. Victoria seemed increasingly frustrated by his presence. His habits annoyed her, his silences unnerved her. And his tenderness with Timmy, something she rarely demonstrated herself, felt, perhaps, like a silent accusation. David noticed the tension, but avoided it. That was David's way, always keeping peace by avoiding conflict. But peace bought by silence is a fragile thing. And soon, the home became a battlefield of unspoken words. One night, after dinner, Victoria turned to David with a forced smile and said, "Maybe you should start cooking more." "You know what I like." Andrew sat at the table, pretending not to hear. David looked from his wife to his father, unsure what to say. "Sure," he replied finally, his voice flat. Andrew excused himself early that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had changed so fast. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't asked for anything. All he wanted was to help, to give back to the family he had once held in his arms as babies. But the warmth had gone. What remained was obligation, tension, and guilt. And so, the distance widened. David stopped joining him for breakfast. Conversations shortened to nods in passing. Timmy, still full of love and innocence, remained Andrew's only joy, but even that connection seemed to irritate Victoria. "Let him play on his own," she said once. "You don't need to hover." One evening, David knocked on Andrew's door. His expression was uneasy. "Dad, we've been talking. Victoria and we just want to make sure you're comfortable here. Are you happy?" It was a loaded question, one that pretended to be about Andrew, but was really about them. Andrew forced a smile. "I'm happy to be close to you and Timmy, but if I'm in the way, just say so." David hesitated, then nodded slightly. "We're all adjusting. It's not easy," and that was all. No reassurances, no apology. Just a quiet admission that the home wasn't big enough for 3 generations after all. A week later, Victoria made the decision Andrew had dreaded. "We've found a retirement community just outside the city," she said one evening, her tone rehearsed. "It is excellent care, activities, you'll be comfortable." Andrew didn't protest, he didn't argue, he simply nodded. Because when a man is pushed out of his own family, the real grief doesn't come with yelling, it comes with silence. The kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that says, "You are no longer needed." Timmy hugged him tightly as he packed Grandpa, Will you come back soon? Of course, Andrew lied gently, his voice cracking. Very soon. The day he left, the house looked brighter, cleaner, almost relieved. Victoria waved from the porch like she was sending off a distant cousin. David didn't meet his eyes. The facility was nice, bright rooms, polite staff. Everything a person could want, except a reason to wake up. Andrew spent his mornings on a bench, watching squirrels dart across the lawn. His afternoons blurred into each other, knitting classes, reading time, quiet meals. The other residents smiled politely, but their eyes were tired, their laughter hollow. He called David once. "How's Timmy?" he asked. "Good," David replied, growing fast. That was it, and slowly, Andrew began to wonder, was this my reward? For all the years I worked, sacrificed, stayed loyal. He had built ships that carried thousands across oceans. Solved problems no one else could, raised a child. Loved a wife until her last breath, but now, in this sterile quiet, he realized something brutal. He had become a man no one was waiting for. Until one afternoon, after folding the same sweater 3 times, he stood up, walked to the desk at the front of the facility, and said, "I'd like to go home." "To your sons?" the woman asked, surprised. "No," Andrew replied, "to what's left of me." He packed his bag, hailed a taxi, and left, but what he would return to would be even harder to face than the loneliness he'd left behind. Because sometimes, what breaks us isn't just exile, it's realizing the place we once called home no longer exists. And that was only the beginning. Andrew had always believed in keeping his pain private. After all, men of his generation were taught to hold things in, to provide, protect, endure. But there, on that cold wooden bench in the city park, something in him gave way. He didn't cry, he didn't curse the sky. He simply sat still, as if waiting for life to offer him a reason to move again. Around him, the world continued as usual. Joggers passed with earbuds in, children played tag beneath fading trees, and couples strolled past with steaming coffee cups. And yet, he might as well have been invisible. Just another old man, hunched in his coat, forgotten by time. He hadn't planned to come here, he hadn't planned anything. After walking away from the retirement facility, Andrew had wandered until his legs gave out. And this bench, worn smooth by weather and years, became his resting place. Not just for his body but for his grief, his confusion, his shame, and that's when she saw him. "Excuse me," the woman said gently, "are you all right?" Andrew turned, startled. She was in her 60s, perhaps older, dressed in a modest coat, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Her face was kind, not pitying, just genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," Andrew mumbled, looking away. She didn't move. "You look like someone who could use a warm drink and a quiet place to sit. My apartment is just down the block." "I make a decent cup of coffee." Andrew hesitated. Pride wrestled with hunger, with loneliness, with the chill seeping into his bones. He glanced up at her again. There was no judgment in her eyes, only warmth. "My name's Barbara," she said, as if offering a lifeline. "Come on, it's not far." And so, for reasons he couldn't explain, Andrew stood up and followed her. Her apartment was tucked into an old brick building with ivy creeping along the front. Inside, the space was small but cozy. The smell of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and a grandfather clock ticked gently in the corner. A crocheted blanket lay across the arm of the couch. Pictures of grandkids were framed above the fireplace. It was the kind of home that felt safe. Barbara placed a mug in front of him. "Take your time. Drink while it's hot." He sipped slowly. The warmth reached parts of him he'd forgotten existed. "Would you like to talk?" she asked. "Or we can just sit." At first, Andrew said nothing, but silence, when met with kindness, becomes unbearable. So, word by word, in a voice that cracked like old floorboards, he told her the story. Not all at once but enough, about the retirement home. About his son, his grandson, about the birthday no one came to. About the house that no longer felt like his. About the feeling of being replaced. Barbara didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty reassurances, she just listened, her hands wrapped around her own cup, her eyes soft with understanding. When he finished, she said quietly, "Sometimes, The people we love the most are the ones who fail us the worst. It doesn't mean they don't love us, but it does mean we have to find love elsewhere, sometimes. Until they remember how to give it again. Her words struck something deep, not anger, not hope, just truth. In the days that followed, Andrew stayed with Barbara. She never made him feel like a guest. He helped around the apartment, walked with her to the market, fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen, even repaired her broken radio. In the evenings, they watched old films and talked about nothing in particular. With her, he felt no pressure to be strong. No shame in being vulnerable. She didn't try to fix him. She just gave him space to breathe. But even in that new warmth, a shadow lingered. Timmy, the little boy who used to cling to his leg, who called him Grandpa Drew, who begged for bedtime stories and pirate adventures. Andrew missed him more than he could bear. One afternoon, as they walked past a playground, Andrew stopped abruptly, his breath caught. Among the children was a small boy with light brown curls, chasing a red ball, laughing as he ran. It was him. Timmy, taller now, more independent. But still Timmy. Barbara followed his gaze. "Is that your grandson?" Andrew nodded. "He's grown," he whispered. "Go say hi," she urged gently. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I don't belong in his world anymore." His parents made that clear. Barbara didn't push. She just stood beside him, sharing the silence. They walked away, but Andrew's heart stayed behind. From then on, every walk near the park became a quiet ritual. Andrew never approached, never waved, but he watched. And in watching, he remembered how much he still wanted to be part of Timmy's life, not out of pride, but out of love. Barbara noticed the weight he carried, the way his gaze lingered, the way he smiled only when Timmy appeared in the distance. One night, as they sat watching the sky darken outside the window, she said, "What would Helen say if she saw you now?" Andrew closed his eyes. She'd say, "Don't give up on your family, even when they give up on you." "So what's stopping you?" He didn't answer. But something shifted inside him. The next morning, he opened the drawer where he kept an old notepad. He found a pen, wrote down David's number, stared at it for what felt like hours, then, with trembling fingers, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Hello," David's voice was cautious. "It's me," Andrew said softly. Silence. "Dad, are you okay? I just wanted to ask how you all are." "How's Timmy?" "He's good, starting school soon." That's wonderful." Another pause. "We should meet sometime," Andrew offered. "We'll see," David replied. The call ended short, empty, but it had happened. And that night, for the first time in weeks, Andrew slept deeply. Not because the world had changed, but because he had taken the first step to change it. In Barbara's small apartment, something had begun to heal. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. And sometimes that's enough, because when love is pushed away, it doesn't die. It waits quietly, hopefully, just like Andrew did on that bench, on that day, when a stranger offered him coffee ... and a chance to begin again. The truth is, families rarely break in a single moment. They wear down slowly under the weight of pride, silence, and everything left unsaid. For Andrew, life with Barbara had become something of a quiet redemption. The days were simple, filled with morning coffee, shared groceries, and evenings of gentle conversation, but beneath that calm, something heavier lingered. He was healing, yes, but healing doesn't always mean closure. Because while Barbara's kindness soothed the ache of abandonment, it couldn't replace what had been lost, his place in his family. His role as father, as grandfather, as a man still needed. He never said it aloud, but anyone who has loved a child, truly loved them, knows that no distance, no silence, no betrayal is ever enough to erase that love. It lives beneath everything, even grief. One day, as Andrew returned from the corner store with Barbara, he spotted a boy across the street near the kindergarten. It was Timmy, his grandson, now a little taller, more confident, but still unmistakably the same curious child. Andrew froze, not in fear but in longing. He watched Timmy run after a soccer ball, laughing freely. That sound, his laughter, was a bomb and a knife all at once. Barbara noticed. "You should go talk to him." "I can't," Andrew replied, barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because I don't want to make it harder for him." Or for David, I don't belong in their lives anymore. Barbara didn't argue, she simply reached over and held his hand. But in her silence, there was something else, a quiet challenge, one that would return to Andrew again and again in the coming days. He tried to brush it off, to bury himself in small tasks, sweeping the patio, mending an old chair, but the truth always found its way back. When you love someone, pretending you don't doesn't protect you, it just hollows you. And then, as if life had grown tired of his avoidance, everything changed in an instant. That evening, Barbara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a loud crash. Rushing into the living room, she found Andrew collapsed on the floor, his face pale, his right side limp, his eyes terrified and searching. She called the ambulance with shaking hands, whispering his name again and again, as if her voice alone could keep him conscious. The hospital lights were harsh, the machines louder than they needed to be. Doctors moved quickly, murmuring things like stroke, limited mobility, speech impairment. Barbara sat beside Andrew's bed, gripping his hand, whispering that he was safe, that help had come, that he wasn't alone. But Andrew couldn't speak, couldn't nod, couldn't move. And in that terrifying stillness, one thought echoed in his mind: will I die without seeing my grandson again? When David arrived at the hospital that night, Barbara met him at the door. Her face was drawn with worrying, her words quiet but clear. He's stable, but it's serious. David stepped inside, and for the first time in a long time, he truly saw his father not as an annoyance or a memory or a complicated past, but as a man brought low by love, age, and loss. Andrew looked up at him, eyes wet, unable to form words. But when David took his hand, Andrew squeezed ever so slightly. It was enough. The next day, Victoria came. Not alone, but with Timmy. At first, she lingered in the doorway, hesitant, unsure if she was welcome. But Timmy ran ahead, straight to his grandfather's bedside. He looked at Andrew, wide-eyed, as if seeing a fallen giant. "Grandpa," he whispered, "will you get better? You promised we'd go to the park again." Andrew tried to smile, but his face would not obey. He managed to lift one trembling hand and rested it on the boy's shoulder. Tears slipped from his eyes. Timmy leaned forward and hugged him tight, whispering, "I love you, Grandpa." Even Victoria, standing quietly by the door, turned away. Her shoulders shook slightly. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was love. Maybe it was both. After they left, David stayed behind. He sat beside Andrew and said, "I thought I could fix everything, Dad. That if I just stayed quiet, things would work themselves out. But I was wrong. You didn't deserve this." "You never did." Andrew couldn't speak. But his eyes, the same eyes that once watched David take his first steps, held forgiveness. In the days that followed, Andrew began to improve, little by little. First a twitch in his fingers, then a nod, then soft, slurred words that only Barbara could understand. David visited often, Timmy to and slowly, Andrew's hospital room transformed not into a place of illness, but of reconnection. One afternoon, as Timmy read aloud from a picture book beside his grandfather's bed, David watched quietly from the corner. "You know," he said, "he tells everyone at school that his grandpa can fix anything." Andrew chuckled, soft and broken, but it was laughter all the same. Then, one day, Victoria returned alone. She sat beside Andrew and didn't speak for several minutes. Then finally, in a voice Andrew hadn't heard from her before, one stripped of defense, she said, "I was wrong. I thought I was protecting Timmy, but I never asked him what he needed. And I never asked you what you needed either." "I'm sorry." Andrew didn't respond with words. He simply took her hand, squeezed it gently, and held it for a moment longer than she expected. Sometimes, forgiveness isn't a conversation. It's just a hand held across the distance of hurt. When Andrew was discharged weeks later, Barbara pushed his wheelchair down the hospital hallway, with David walking beside them, Timmy running ahead, and Victoria following behind. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't resolved, but it was something new, a chance. Because illness has a way of revealing what we've hidden. And sometimes it takes the frailty of a parent to remind a child of what truly matters. The heart of a child doesn't keep score. It doesn't remember mistakes or measure time in resentments. It simply loves, and in doing so, teaches the rest of us how to begin again. And that was how Andrew found his way home. Not back to an address, but to a place in his family where love could be spoken again, not in grand gestures, but in soft smiles, small hands, and the quiet power of not giving up. Healing rarely begins with a grand gesture. More often, it starts with something small: a hesitant visit, a softened tone, a silence filled not with resentment, but with possibility. For Andrew Miller, healing didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, stitched together slowly by time, honesty, and the quiet courage to face what had been broken. After his release from the hospital, Andrew returned not to the house where his son and daughter-in-law lived, but to the small apartment he now shared with Barbara. It wasn't the home he once imagined growing old in, but it was warm, filled with soft light and the scent of cinnamon bread. More importantly, it was a place where he felt safe to exist, without judgment or obligation. Barbara welcomed him as if he'd never left, wheeling him carefully inside and placing his favorite wool blanket across his lap. And in that small act, Andrew understood that this chapter, however unexpected, might be worth writing. David came often in the weeks that followed, sometimes with Timmy, sometimes alone. Their conversations, once stiff and filled with pauses, began to flow more naturally. They spoke about simple things: how work was going, the shows Timmy liked to watch, what the weather had been like that week. But underneath those mundane topics lived a deeper truth. David was trying to rebuild something he once took for granted, trying to reconnect not just as a son, but as a man willing to acknowledge where he went wrong. Victoria stayed away at first. Her absence wasn't surprising, nor was it bitter. Andrew knew she needed space-time to reckon with the choices she had made and the walls she had built, and perhaps time to consider whether they could be dismantled. It wasn't until a quiet Saturday afternoon, as Andrew and Barbara shared coffee on the porch, that Victoria appeared at the door. She didn't arrive with rehearsed apologies or dramatic tears. She came with a humble knock and a nervous glance. "Hello, Andrew," she said, her voice cautious but sincere. He nodded gently. "Victoria." Barbara invited her in without hesitation. She poured her a cup of coffee, asked nothing, demanded nothing. And for a while, they sat in a triangle of silence, three people connected by history, pain, and a child who loved them all. Then, softly, Victoria spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you," she glanced at Andrew. "About Timmy and David, about how we got here." Andrew didn't interrupt. He had learned that the most powerful things often unfold when you leave space for them. "I wanted control," she continued. "I thought if I kept everything neat and organized, if I removed anything uncomfortable, we'd be okay. But what I removed was you. And I see now that Timmy lost something he didn't even have words for." Her voice broke then, not dramatically, but enough to let the truth show. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Andrew looked at her not as the woman who had once pushed him out, but as someone who, like him, had made mistakes out of fear, not malice. And fear, he knew, was a cruel architect. It builds walls under the guise of safety. "I accept your apology," he said, "not because everything's fixed, but because we all need room to try again." That evening, something shifted. Not a resolution, but a softening. Victoria stayed for dinner. She listened as Timmy told a wild story about school, laughed at Barbara's dry humor, and for the first time in a long while, looked at Andrew not with avoidance but with gratitude. In the days that followed, she returned bringing cookies Timmy helped bake, sometimes staying for just 15 minutes, sometimes longer. Andrew never asked why. He only welcomed her, each time, like a father opening the door to something fragile and precious. Timmy, of course, felt the change before anyone said it aloud. Children are gifted like that. They see tension not in words, but in the air. And they also sense when that air begins to clear. He was brighter, more talkative, eager to show Andrew his drawings, to ask questions about the old clock in Barbara's hallway, to cuddle close during movies as if to make up for all the missed nights. Then one morning, Victoria arrived with David. They looked different, worn, perhaps, but aligned in a way they hadn't been for years. They sat at the kitchen table, nervous but unified. "We've decided not to move," David said. "We're going to stay and try counseling. For us, for Timmy." Victoria nodded. "We're not promising to be perfect, but we're promising to stay, to listen, to stop hiding behind our frustrations and actually face what's hurting. Andrew's throat tightened, not from sadness, but from a kind of quiet awe. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "It won't be easy, but the best things never are." From that point on, life didn't become magical, it became real. There were setbacks, awkward conversations, moments where old habits reared their heads. But there was also laughter, shared dinners, afternoons in the park. Barbara became Grandma Barbara, a title she wore with reluctant pride. And Andrew, once a ghost in his own lineage, was now the anchor. One bright Saturday, the whole family gathered for a picnic. David and Timmy flew a kite while Barbara laid out the food. Victoria passed around lemonade. Andrew sat beneath the shade of a tall maple tree, watching them all, his heart full in ways he hadn't thought possible. Timmy ran over, cheeks flushed, hair wild, and threw his arms around Andrew's shoulders. "Grandpa," he said, beaming, "I tell all my friends at school that my grandpa is the coolest person ever." Andrew chuckled, holding the boy close. And in that moment, the years of silence, the bitterness, the ache of exclusion, they all faded. Not gone, not erased, but woven into the larger fabric of something stronger. A family that had nearly fallen apart, now learning, one day at a time, how to stay together. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a daily choice. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing connection over distance, love over ego. And sometimes, it takes losing everything to finally understand what matters most. Andrew had thought his story was ending, but what he discovered, there beneath the maple tree, surrounded by imperfect people who were trying to do better, was that some endings are just the beginning of a new chapter. There comes a moment in life not marked by age or milestones when we are forced to confront the truth about what truly matters. For Andrew, it wasn't his 80th birthday, nor the day he moved into the retirement facility. It was the moment he realized he no longer held a place in the lives of those he had once lived for. And yet, even in that heartbreak, he discovered something far more profound, that healing doesn't require perfection, it only requires presence. This story, while fictional, reflects a painfully real truth for many people today. Aging parents left in silence, grandparents watching from a distance, children caught between obligation and resentment, marriages fraying under the weight of unspoken expectations. And yet, within that darkness, there is hope. Not because we can erase what's been done, but because we can choose, even now, to do better. Andrew's journey teaches us that being needed is not a demand we place on others, it's a bridge we build with compassion, humility, and vulnerability. It wasn't grand speeches that repaired his relationship with David. It was quiet gestures, a phone call, a shared silence in a hospital room, a hand held across years of misunderstanding. Likewise, it wasn't guilt that changed Victoria's heart, it was witnessing the raw, undeniable love between a grandfather and his grandson. That kind of love isn't loud, it doesn't argue, it simply is. It waits, patiently, for a chance to be seen again. And perhaps most beautifully, this story reminds us of the underestimated power of a child's heart. Timmy, unaware of adult complexities, knew only what he felt: love, connection, safety. In his simple desire to be near his grandfather, he became the catalyst for a family's healing. Sometimes, the youngest among us hold the wisdom we've long forgotten. So what does this mean for you right now? It means that it's never too late to make a phone call you've been avoiding, to say "I miss you" to someone who once mattered, to knock on a door with no expectations, only honesty. It means choosing to pause in your busyness and ask your aging parents not just how they're doing but how they're feeling. It means forgiving yourself for what you didn't know, and forgiving others for what they couldn't say. Because at the end of our lives, we won't remember the things we bought or the promotions we earned. We'll remember who sat with us when we were afraid, who called just to hear our voice, who said "I see you" when we felt invisible. This isn't a message just for the elderly, it's a message for all of us. Whether you're a parent, a child, a spouse, or a friend, you are part of someone's story. You have the power, even in the smallest of gestures, to remind someone they still matter, and sometimes, that's all it takes. Life lesson: true connection doesn't require perfection, it only requires effort. Make the call, send the message, visit, even if it's awkward. The moments you choose not to turn away may end up being the most meaningful ones in someone's life and in yours. A question for you: if someone you care about suddenly disappeared tomorrow, what would you regret not saying to them today? Please share your thoughts below by commenting. You can keep it short, just a few words. Sometimes your answer might help someone else say what they've been holding in too. If this story touched your heart, we kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating stories that heal, inspire, and remind us what it means to be human. If you'd like to go a step further and support this work financially, we welcome donations. Any amount, big or small, helps us continue sharing these stories. The truth is, I'm getting older too. And while I may not have the strength I once did, I've made it my mission to spend the rest of my time doing something good for the world, sharing real, soulful stories that bring people closer. So if you found value here today, a donation or subscription is not just a thank you, it's fuel for future stories. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for listening.